Hi, everyone. Thanks, Amplify Bangkok, for having us. We are here to talk about blockchain interoperability. I am Camila Russo. I'll be moderating the panel. I'm the founder of the Defiant, which aims to provide the best information in DeFi and Web3. So hope you're all subscribed to our newsletters and podcasts. And we have Andy from the Rollup, and maybe equally good media company covering DeFi and Web3. Keone, co-founder of Layer 1 Monad. Georgios from Axelar, who focuses on exactly this, interoperability. And Ed Felton from Off-Chain Labs, which built Arbitrum, one of the top Ethereum Layer 2s. So amazingly stacked panel. Okay, so right now, the blockchain ecosystem has matured to a point where there are basically, layer 2 on Ethereum gets created every other day. There are multiple different layer 1s, which has increased block space and has made blockchain scalable. But it's also created fragmentation for users, making it kind of hard to navigate the space. So let's start with the problems before we get to talk about the solutions for this. To the panelists, what are the main challenges users are facing today when transacting in blockchain? Let's start with Andy.
Yeah, I think one of the largest ones that I personally face is moving assets across different chains, specifically across different execution environments from different L1s and then also within the EVM from different L2s. Frankly, I think that bridging is kind of a outdated task for users, and I expect that to kind of slowly get phased out into a more seamless interaction. But succinctly, I think this cross-chain transfer of assets and bridging is where a lot of my friends that I've onboarded onto crypto get stuck. And so I view that as being one of the largest complications now.
Yeah, just really briefly, fragmentation of liquidity as well as fragmentation of each user's assets. We have, some nice views over that aggregate many chains, but it's still a matter of going to the right place and doing the right thing.
Yeah, fragmentation is the word, and I think, Andy articulated this really well, so not much to add, but blockchain technology itself is just hard as it is. You have to set up a wallet, like self-custody. There's already so many barriers. And in a world where, I frankly believe there's going to be like more than 1 million chains, having people just bridge every time they need to use a new application, a new chain, is just going to be horrible user experience, right? So with Axelar, our vision from day one has been chain abstraction. How do we allow people to just have to think about assets and applications, right? So in your phone, you're going to have one interface. Maybe it's a wallet, maybe it's something else. Who knows what the end state is? But people should only have to think about their assets, their applications, and whether they're using, the Uniswap chain or the Aave chain or Monad, that should all be abstracted away, right? And not have to think about that. So that's the problem we're trying to solve with Axelar.
So in addition to all of these things, I think one of the fundamental causes of the difficulty in user experience stems from trust and safety considerations. These systems are very unforgiving of mistakes. You do something wrong, you cut and paste the wrong address from the wrong place, poof, your money's gone forever. No getting it back, right? And so because of this, the process of designing a smooth user interface is so difficult because you can't, or at least we don't know today, how to hide from users those trust and security or loss of funds issues that can arise. And so users get exposed to and are forced to manually manage so much of this stuff simply because we don't have a good way to reconcile protection of the users with the kind of ease of use that people are used to in other parts of their online lives. And I think we're going to have to continue to work on that issue until we can get to the user experience that we can all imagine in our heads.
And just to add to that, I think that this notion of one click of doing something on chain can just cause a catastrophic problem, especially if you're using a hot wallet. Also kind of disincentivizes people to interact on chain. And I think we had a lot of DeFi enthusiasts in the 2020, 2021 era who kind of lost some capital from smart contracts or had a bad experience, and it's kind of disincentivized them to keep interacting on chain. And I think that disincentivization of usage has been seen on chain with the same wallets and the same users back in 2020, 2021 are now using the chain actually less. So yeah.
I think, it's interesting where we're at because it's after a transition of, the main problem for Ethereum and blockchains broadly was scalability, right? Like in the previous bull markets, it was like, oh, I can't buy the next hot NFT because I can't get my transaction across or because it costs $300 to send money or buy something. Now it seems like that problem for the current amount of views has been solved, which is, I think it's a huge step forward, but this is the current problem that we're facing now. Okay, with scalability kind of solved for now, we have this UX issue. And so there's two levels, pun intended, I guess, with that. And one is specifically in the Ethereum ecosystem and interacting across layer 2s and with Ethereum mainnet. So Ed, how do we move forward in making that more seamless?
So I think there's a few things. One is from this trust and safety dimension, we need to make it so that the user can have confidence that they're only relying on technologies or chains that they trust or would trust. So the question of how to, just as it took a long time in Web 2 to figure out how to make things as simple as logging into websites actually sort of work in a relatively user-friendly way that also had a decent level of security, we're going to have to iterate on that. I think that's part of it. I also think there are fundamental things we need to figure out how to do at the protocol level in order to provide, because one of the considerations we have today is just how long it takes. What's the response time when the user wants to move something from point A to point B, right? That takes too long. It interrupts the flow of the user experience. And we need to figure out how to do that quickly without sacrificing the other things that we still value, the trust and safety, and also just the reliability of the chain. How can you do that faster than the L1 block time, for example?
What are some of the enablers that, are in the works now that can help us get it to a good end state?
Well, I think UX experimentation is part of it, for sure. There's work on standardization going on in the Ethereum L2, L3 community to standardize on those things that we know we need to standardize, like how do you say which chain you mean, and how do you talk about it, how do you express an address on a different chain, or how do you express an intent to move funds from point A to point B in a way that's standard across different tools and stacks. All that is important. I also think that ongoing research about the design for cross-chain secure protocols actually is going to play a role. So to me, the sort of core technical part of interop is not really solved yet, at least not solved to the degree that we need to solve it.
Just kind of curious, Ed, on the point of standardization, like how critical are these roll-up as a services to sort of like getting Arbitrum's technology in the hands of more individual L2s?
I think actually quite important. Although our team and the other, L2 teams do a lot of work to try to reduce the complexity and cost of operating the infrastructure for an L2 or L3 chain. The fact is that many of the parties who want to be able to launch these chains either aren't able to or would prefer not to spend the cost and effort to actually manage that infrastructure. So the roll-up as a service providers, they turned that technical and operational problem into a money problem, right? They will do that for you for a price, and that really does open it up. And I think with the emergence and now relative maturity of those roll-up as a service providers, we're seeing a lot more app chains get built and released, and it's becoming more and more like the the kind of revolution that happened with the arrival of things like Amazon Web Services, how it made it so much easier to build a Web 2 type product. I think we're seeing this. It's making it a lot easier for people to launch chains, for sure.
And then we're talking about Ethereum layer 2 interoperability. Now let's narrow down on layer 1 cross-chain interoperability. Keon, if you can talk about that.
Sure. I think one thing to point out is that, so just to back up a little bit, Monad is a new layer 1 that's focused on bringing new technology to market, ultimately to help scale Ethereum and the EVM substantially from about 1 million transactions per day for Ethereum to 1 billion transactions per day for Monad. So basically making this network much, much, much more computationally dense so we can get a lot more work out of the hardware that's there and support many, many more users. And there's a couple different improvements that are enabling that. But one to highlight is the consensus mechanism, Monad BFT, which is supporting hundreds of nodes, fully geographically distributed, fully decentralized, with single slot finality and 1 second block times, which I think is on the top of everyone's mind right now, given that there was this rumor about ETH 3.0 introducing 1 second block times and single slot finality. And I think as of 25 minutes ago, it sounded like they're shooting for 3 slot finality and 4 second block times to get to 12 second finality, which is currently the block time. But right now, Ethereum finality is 12 to 18 minutes or so. So anyway, that is actually a good segue to what you were asking about, which is what does interoperability look like for an L1? And really the finality time is really crucial to that because, while a transaction is not finalized, a bridge basically needs to wait for that finality to occur before, signing off on that message on any other chain. So at the end of the day, to have much faster interoperability, we actually need much faster consensus. And I think it's really important that every layer 1 focus on improving their finality times so that bridging can be much more efficient, so that then all of the UX problems that we're talking about when we're talking about how difficult it is to move assets from one chain to another, that becomes much more zippy. But it's all tied to consensus and it's all tied to this finality.
I think bridges will still be the main infrastructure to do this. And does bridging essentially mean locking funds in, a smart contract and then replicating those funds on another chain, which, is a mechanism that's been exploited over and over again?
Well, I would say that the sort of 2 major choices, I think maybe to some people there would be 3 choices, which are bridges, roll-up enshrine bridges, and the bridge that exists between a layer 1 and a layer 2. And the third choice being having a centralized party that, tracks the mint and burn mechanism. For example, CCTP, which is Circle is basically on both chains, and when you deposit to Circle and turn in 1 USDC on Ethereum, and you tell them, I want it to be minted on Solana, because they're a centralized party that's on both chains, they can, make sure to only mint after the burn has happened. So that's Circle is basically a 1 out of 1 bridge that is connecting all these chains for this one specific asset. The other 2 choices, a pure third-party bridge versus an enshrined roll-up bridge, I think they're actually closer than what maybe some people might think. I would emphasize that a roll-up is an enshrined bridge that enables users to deposit to a bridge contract on the L1, mint claim tokens on the L2, and know that even if the roll-up disappears, that they can always withdraw their funds on the bridge contract. So anyway, the point is those are kind of the major choices that we have. And with respect to a fully freestanding L1, it is really just the third-party bridge versus centralized either exchange or Circle type entity.
I don't know. I wish there was something better, but yes, it is what it is.
Well, I mean, do you guys?
Yeah.
If you disagree, let me know.
I mean, from a technical perspective, you will need to bridge, right? And it depends on how you define bridging, but you will need to be able to pass information from one chain to another. So you do some cross-chain action, right? Whether that's like lock and mint or some other bridging mechanism, I think that's not the main point. Like, it's kind of irrelevant. Regardless of the mechanism, we'll be able to get good user experience on top, so people won't have to worry about that, right? And the mechanisms underlying those bridging solutions are getting more and more secure. Most of the hacks we saw in the space were because fully centralized entities were pretending to be like decentralized entities, getting hundreds of millions of dollars on top of them. And when eventually it was found out that, it was just the founder holding some funds on a ledger, they got compromised, right? On the decentralized solutions that exist in the space, like Axelar, like we haven't really seen any hacks, right? And have many, good examples, Axelar, Layer 0, Wormhole, like all running for the last 3 years with no security incidents, right? And you can even combine those solutions at this point in time. So it's going to get very hard to compromise any funds. And on top of those layers, you can build good user experience so the user won't have to think about that, right? So I think people associate bridging with all of the bad things that have happened in the past, but that's because people took shortcuts and did things the wrong way, right? So bridging is actually not that bad, and as long as we can attract it away for the user experience, we're in a pretty good place.
So in terms of L2 to L2 or L3 to L2 bridging, I think what you really want is a solution that does 3 things all at the same time: low cost, crosslessness, and faster than the L1 block time. Ideally much faster, right? And I think there's nothing out there that does that now. But that's really the goal that we are shooting for in our interop research.
Nobody mentioned intent-based designs, which I think struggles with the second point there. But it's trustlessness in the sense of you're trusting the market makers to fulfill your order.
Yeah, so when I say trustless, I mean fully trustless, right? You don't have to trust some market maker or some intermediary, that you can be protected. If they don't perform, then they don't get your money.
But it's not that bad, right? It's a one-of n. You just need one person to fill the order. As long as you create a market for the intents, that's trustless. Yeah.
Yes. So, but one of the things you want is that it is trustless, meaning that if they don't perform, you're okay. But also that you can settle this faster than the L1 block time, which means that, intents are a good way to express what you want, right? For someone to say, I would like to move these funds from this chain to that chain, right? And then others can show up and say, okay, I'll be the counterparty, right? But then that having happened, what you want is for the 2 actions on the 2 chains to happen trustlessly so that each party knows that they won't get paid unless the other party got paid over there, right? And to do that faster than the L1 block time. So you can't even rely on doing anything on L1 to make it happen. That's kind of the goal, which I think there's nothing out there today which does that, but I still believe it's possible.
So if you were trying to bridge from a particular L2 to another particular L2 using Axelar, what would be like the transfer time right now, and what is that like predicated on?
Right now, if you use the intent-based protocol on top, it's going to take like 10 seconds and it's getting faster. If you want to have like, fully trustless passing of data, there by default Axelar waits for the sequencer to write the state on the layer 1, which is like, 15, 20 minutes a day. But given all the innovations that are happening, like we expect long-term, it's going to be very, very fast, right? A few seconds. But given 90% of the cross-chain activity for all cross-chain activities bridging today, for the vast majority of users, like the UX is pretty good, right? It's like a few seconds. I guess Ed would argue that this is not fully trustless because it's an external validation set, or I assume you would, yeah.
So when I say fully trustless, I mean without any additional security assumptions beyond the user trusting, or these parties trusting the 2 chains that they're on.
Yeah, makes sense. But overall, like, at least, for most users, and they seem to be fine with it, it's pretty fast, right?
Giorgio, so we've been talking about interoperability from the user perspective, but I'd love for you to expand on interoperability for the developer perspective, which I understand that it's also what you focus on, right?
Yep, that's great. So I'd actually like to add to Ed's point earlier, right? So I talked a lot about, trustless L2 to L2 and L3 to L3 interoperability. Our view is a little bit different here in that there's other ecosystems like, Monad and Solana and Sui. I'm a big fan of the technical implementation and innovations there. And with Axelar, we're trying to build something that will work for all ecosystems. So effectively, I guess hopefully we get to a state where you have a native interoperability within Ethereum. And with Axelar, we can effectively find a hub on Ethereum and route information through that to other L2s. But for developers, I feel like they will want to have access to users from Solana, from Sui. So we're trying to offer endpoints to all of them.
This is great. I mean, I focus on L2 and L3 because I design and build L2s and L3s. That's not at all to discount the value of bridging between different L1 ecosystems. There's a lot of value there.
Yep, and that's exactly what we're focusing on, right? Just providing a solution so developers from any chain can enable this seamless user experience. Again, the end goal is one where users only have to think about assets and applications. Maybe the application lives on Monad, probably a few applications will live there, a few good applications, some on Solana, some on Sui, and people don't have to think, and developers can pick the best platform for their use case to build on without having to worry about fragmentation.
Yeah, you mentioned in the beginning you're expecting 1 million chains. Is Axelar able to be extensible enough with the validator-based communication or asset transfers to be able to get to 1 million chains? Or how does Axelar get to 1 million chains?
Well, that's a great question. There's a few different ways to scale there. If there's 1 million L2s, ideally we can route through the Ethereum layer 1, especially if you have proofs there, like just use ZK-based connections. So we do have high conviction that you will need a hub, because if there's at least a few ecosystems beyond Ethereum that succeed, pairwise connections don't work that well, especially from a security perspective, because something breaks, you cannot limit the damage, like it affects everything else. So hub and spoke is important. But on the Axelar hub, on the Axelar blockchain, we can build ZK-based connections directly to L2s and L3s, in which case it can scale very fast. We can also work with teams that deploy their own validator connections to Axelar, so it doesn't have to be the full validator set. Of course, you compromise a little bit on security there, but if it's the same validator set of those chains, could be okay, right? So there's a few connectivity methods, and we're actively building some ZK connections from Axelar to Ethereum and some other chains to have redundancy of implementation as well.
And the one question that's been looming over Ethereum is that, the Ethereum ecosystem is trying to figure this out, like how to connect all of the layer 2s with Ethereum mainnet. And there's a lot of progress there, but there's this risk or perceived risk that other layer 1s are making so much progress in bringing adoption over to their chains while Ethereum continues to figure this out. How big is that risk that Ethereum, continues to lose market share before they can actually, reach this goal of unifying Ethereum?
I think just empirically, if you look at the amount of developer activity and user activity within EVM systems, the numbers show that Ethereum's very, very far ahead. And I think that over the last 6 months, what happened with Solana is that it felt like for that period of time, and even still up till today, that while Ethereum has had this dominant lead as the #1 smart contract platform, it is now clear that Solana is a second, and that there is a competitive nature to this environment. I think the other L1s are also trying to kind of figure out what their value proposition is and kind of how they're going to onboard developers and users. But broadly, I view Ethereum still as having this kind of steadfast and dominant position as the most decentralized smart contract L1. With regards to ETH, the asset, which is where I think a lot of these kind of questions stem from, a lot of people are kind of wondering how Ethereum, the asset, is going to be valued compared to other L1s and Bitcoin itself. And I think other L1 price performance has also kind of stirred up this narrative as ETH has been kind of lagging. And so I think that compared to other L1s, ETH has way more of a sovereign store value premium compared to Solana or Sui or any of these other L1 tokens. And so I think for Ethereum, the question remains, should there be changes to the L1 slot times? Should we improve the L1, or should it just be a replicated state machine for settling roll-up blocks. So I think that there's a lot of work to do. But I think that what has clearly happened this year that wasn't present before 2024, in my opinion, is that there is now significant competitive force from Solana to kind of like get Ethereum to get their shit together. And I think that the community has actually responded quite well.
Actually, with today's announcement, looks like, things are going to change even faster.
Yeah, I would argue that the really the fundamental thing that, because when we talk about, like I was asking you, Georgios, about the, like time to move from one L2 to another, and it's all fundamentally tied to the finality of the L1. So I think it is extremely important that Ethereum find ways to make finality much, much faster. Ideally get to single slot finality, ideally get to 1 second block times. It's a technology problem. There is also a cultural aspect where, because there's heavy prioritization of solo stakers, and a desire for, a system with over 10,000 nodes, 1 million validators, but like a lot of the validators are virtual validators that being run on the same node. Being able to still sort of satisfy all the fundamental parameters of the network, but then also get to single slot finality and 1 second block times, or at least like much more frequent block times, is really important, because a lot of other things are stacked on top of that. And until that gets solved, it's hard to get really seamless UX in layers above.
I have a maybe contrarian view about this, a couple of maybe contrarian views about this. One of them is that I think Ethereum has obviously taken this layered approach to building out the ecosystem, and I think it's been incredibly successful. And in a layered protocol stack, you don't need or want to solve every problem at the bottom layer, right? The bottom layer should be attacking the issues that need to be solved in the bottom layer for the good of the stack. So fast block time, fast finality, absolutely. Those both matter because the upper layers are constrained by those. But Ethereum doesn't need to do everything at the L1 level. That's contrarian view number one. Contrarian view number two is that the diversity of different L2 and L3 chains is a big strength of Ethereum. No one is complaining, I think, about culinary fragmentation in Bangkok, right? You have this huge problem that there are so many different restaurants and the food comes from so many different cultures. It's prepared by so many different people, different ambiance, right? That's not a problem. That is the strength, right? But the one reason it's a strength is that you have choice and you can choose where to go, and you can go someplace different every night if you like, and you know how to do it. There's standards and so on. It's easy to switch, right? So diversity is a huge strength but the challenge is to provide the experience so that instead of this becoming fragmentation, it just manifests as choice, which is what you want.
But you would agree that the finality problem is like a thing that the layer one should absolutely improve on.
I'm totally on board for that.
All right. And now to wrap up, where are we going? Like, what's the end goal? What does that look like for you? And how far do you think we are from getting there? Maybe we can start with that.
Sure. I think we've come quite a distance down the road, but we have a ways to go. We still haven't figured out how to provide the user experience that users want, nor how to provide the developer experience, right? And I think we can learn a lot from the development of Web 2. It took them a while to figure out both what was the user experience be, but also what is the model that developers use to write code for Web 2, right? That took a while to emerge, arguably, maybe 5 years or more. You could argue it's still emerging. And we haven't got there yet. I think when we get to the point where you can buy a book at the bookstore that explains how to do cross-chain Web3 programming within sort of the standard paradigm for doing that, then I think we'll have come a long distance. But, it's going to take experimentation and people trying different things to get us there.
I agree. It's going to take some time, to have the full-fledged seamless UX in Web3. At the same time, I do feel like we're very close to a place where we can fulfill the original promise of crypto, which was just banking everyone in the world, right? There's billions of people in the world that have no access to stable coins. Now, if you have a, cell phone, you should be able to install a wallet. Now, Telegram with their chain and like mini apps, you should even be able to do it without even generating, a private key, just with social login. And with the next generation of stablecoin protocols, now we're going to have tokenized T-bills on chain, which is the equivalent of savings accounts available to, again, billions of people that didn't even have access to stablecoins or sound money in the past, right? So I feel pretty good about where we are. Again, more complex, more sophisticated use cases will take time, but as long as we're incrementally adding value to the world and onboarding more and more developers, I feel like in a great direction. And, it's probably like the last year for me, like has been probably the first time over the past 7 years I've been working in the space where I feel like we're actually very, very close to fulfilling this promise of just giving access to anyone in the world to sound money, but that's just the first step and we'll keep building from there.
I think there's incredible potential right now. And I think that sort of the things that have crystallized for me are like if we have a clear pitch to Web2 developers to build their apps in a decentralized way. And that pitch is basically, we have common standards. We have Solidity, the EVM. We have many different competing infrastructure providers like fundamental layers that have baked in payment systems and baked in decentralized identity systems. We have millions of users that already have created accounts in these environments and have already transferred funds over. So we have kind of like actually a very good competitive landscape that can result in application developers avoiding, getting all the benefits of being able to plug into a Visa or a Stripe, where we have this embedded payment system. Like if you're a small business, the biggest problem is how do you actually receive money? And we actually have that part built in. And it's with an open standard. And there's the fact that it's an open standard means that competitive pressures will really push costs down. So if you're a developer on Stripe or on Visa, you're paying that 3% or even more percent transaction fee. The competitive forces mean that if that cost is too high on one layer, you can migrate to another one. And there's no vendor lock-in because you're building for the EVM. So I think that all of the pieces are there to enable this this paradigm where it is, developers get access to amazing onboarded user bases already with a built-in payment system and a competitive landscape for the base layers. But what we need right now is the base layer to actually scale and get the really cheap fees and get that really high density of computation, which is what our team is working on.
I was going to say, I know a very scalable base layer. It's great to have the answers from these three gentlemen, as well as the entire day, have been extremely positive. The little green candles while you're working for tirelessly over and over again changes the sentiment and really keeps people thinking in the right direction in some capacity. I think just to kind of add on and just bundle this all up, we had Ethereum kind of unbundle itself from the L1 and launch this roll-up centric roadmap. And throughout the last 4 years, we've seen the advent of other L1s as well. And just the broader blockchain space has expanded significantly. And so I think part of the end game that we touched on today is really just rebundling this, bringing users into a blockchain experience that, while we take safety and security of different execution environments and each chain seriously, we operate as one net new user into Arbitrum, into Monad, Ethereum, Solana, Sui, any of these ecosystems as one net new user and one positive liquidity force for the broader space. And I think that right now the fragmentation that we have creates a bit more of an infighting and has ideological downstream effects. Whereas I think that if we kind of can get that unification and fragmentation from the UX perspective, the net new users probably aren't going to know about the original days of Ed Felton and Mark from Optimism on panels going at it about fraud proofs or about other kind of infighting between chains, right? And so I think that these types of developments for net new users coming into a broader crypto space will encourage a more collaborative outcome for all. And I view that we're getting there slowly but surely, and very excited for to grow the broader pie together.
Great. Well, great place to end. I think just extreme optimism across the board. And like Andy said, I think the couple green candles definitely help. But it's been, many years of building infrastructure for blockchains, and I think it's true that it's finally all coming together to a place where we can get mass adoption and we can get mass usage and mainstream applications. So this has also been a common narrative. There's so much infrastructure. I think the next step is building apps that everyone wants to use, but that's for a different panel. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Axelar and Amplify.